Good morning. Today I woke up as a Rotterdammer. I was staying at my brother Titus's place in Delfshaven, and it was a great feeling because at the moment in Amsterdam where I live, the most fashionable thing to say is, I'm thinking about moving to Rotterdam. So I'm quite afraid of losing all my friends. At the other hand, it's a reason for me to be here often. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. A talk about ethics is always a reason for a heated morning. That's what I hope for. So please ask me as many questions as you like as soon as I've finished my story. I'm familiar with two industries. At the one hand, news media and publishing and journalism, and at the other, the world of brands and advertising. And I work in both. And what I'd like to talk about today is how these two worlds meet, how they sometimes collide, and how they sometimes collaborate. When does it go well, and when does it go wrong? So I will share with you some success stories, but also some scandals, and present a way that might be the way out to make it work. How to combine journalism and advertising in a proper way without traversing over ethical boundaries. So, the ethics of editorial advertising. In 2013, I published a book called The Editorial Age. And in it, I investigated the rise of a phenomenon I started calling branded journalism. And for a great many journalists, when they hear these words, it makes them angry, and this is because there's a distinction between branded journalism and independent journalism. And independent journalism, of course, is what we all hold dear, and that's the kind of journalism that is very important to our society. But then the methods and skills that journalists use are also very much in demand at brands at the moment. And for a great many journalists and for a great many publishers, this was new, particularly because there used to be a very strict division between church and state, as they call it, between regular independent editorial stories and advertising. And this wall, this division, has been crumbling down at an alarming pace over the last few years. So we are now looking at a different landscape than, say, 10 years ago. So why is this phenomenon of branded journalism growing so fast? It has to do with two developments. At the one hand, it's the attention crisis that advertisers and brands are facing. For us, for critical consumers, for citizens, it's easier than ever to ignore and circumvent advertising. A great many of you will use ad blockers. We watch ad-free channels like Netflix or HBO. We fast forward or skip the commercial breaks when we watch television, if we watch television, because this is something that is diminishing as well. So it's harder for brands to get their message across to a mass audience. In fact, we, the citizens, are now in control what we see, over what we see and when. Now, a few clever brands have found out that if you're not the disruption, but rather the thing that people actually want to see, then you have a chance of regaining this attention. So that means trying to make stories that are so interesting that people will voluntarily spend their time on them. And to do this, you might need the skills that successful media have used over the years. But in the media industry, things weren't going so well. At a great many publishers, at newspapers, for instance, there have been declining circulations. A lot of people have lost their job, and advertising revenue had been shrinking for a long time. So that made publishers more eager than before and more willing to collaborate with brands and advertisers. So this division between church and state was crumbling because of this. So can you combine the two in an ethical way? And ethics is just one part of the story. There's also the question of, will it lead to anything interesting? Will it create something that we would actually like to read or watch? Can anyone remember an advertorial that you really, really liked? Oh.
Or no, maybe it's not really an advertising. I guess it was just advertising, but I really liked it.
Yeah, let's talk about this. Okay, I'd love to hear this example, and maybe it'll fit within this whole frame of examples.
It was this video by an Australian advertising agency, I think, and it was about people getting off of the railways when they want to cross the roads.
Yeah.
Like not doing that, but actually going to the zebrapad. And they made a really nice song, and it was called "Dumb Ways to Die."
Yes, I know this is yeah.
Different ways that are really stupid to die, and then in the end they introduce it's really dumb to die on a railway track.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it was a worldwide hit,
Yeah.
because it was only meant for Australia, but people all over the world loved it, and I think even the song became a hit song, and so it wasn't just the video. This is a good example of branded entertainment, because it's fiction, it's a very nice animation, there's a songwriter involved, there's music involved, and it is something that is absolutely worth your time to watch. But it doesn't have any kind of editorial or journalistic involvement. But it's a related territory, but it has less of an ethical problem. What I'd like to show you is this particular story published on the global corporate website of Coca-Cola a few years ago. What you see here is what happens when advertising people try to make an interesting story. It's the worst of both worlds. This is real, this is no joke. So there were massive floods in Colorado in that year, and Coca-Cola at some point stepped in. There's a couple who lost their home, and they brought them a crate of Coca-Cola, and now they're smiling again. And as you can see, the product is there's a good product shot. You can see the bottle and the logo. So here you can see the clash. And how the question is how to avoid this. Can you actually make stories for brands that make sense? One of my favorite examples in this field is a quarterly magazine published by Google called Google Think Quarterly. You would only get your hands on a copy of this magazine if Google thinks you're an important person. So it's completely free, but it's very exclusive. So they only send it to a few people that they really like and appreciate. So it's a status symbol. And I felt that was a pretty powerful way to distribute your branded content. And the contents of this were actually interesting. It's all written by great journalists. There's interviews with high-profile people like the former spin doctor of Tony Blair, Alistair Campbell. And every issue was completely different with a customized cover and a completely different radical layout. So this is something valuable. And it's something that puts forward Google's perspective rather than their product. So if you are a confident brand, and you have a strong point of view, and you have a perspective that you can share, you can make something interesting if you involve the right people to make it. But then we hit another clash. Does anyone recognize this man? Yeah, this is the David Miscavige, the leader of the Scientology Church. A few years ago, this article was published on the website of the Atlantic Monthly, and this is a very well-respected, super traditional American magazine, a news magazine. The public, the readership of the Atlantic was outraged over this because they didn't expect a piece about the Scientology Church that wasn't critical at all. But if they paid close attention, you could see this little yellow banner saying sponsor content. But overall, the whole impression it makes is just like any other story in terms of the typeface, the layout, the colors used, etc. So people created a massive fuss about this on Twitter, and then the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic had to apologize. They withdrew this article, and they changed their policy. So they don't work for every advertiser anymore, and they make sure that their disclaimer, that their labeling is much clearer, so that you know that this is not made or endorsed by the editors of The Atlantic. There's an alternative to doing this. There's an alternative to trying to hide between the veil of respectability that news media have. You can show your true colors. One of the places that I really love visiting is mrporter.com. It's a web store for men's clothing, but they also have a weekly journal with stories about style, written by the same people that write for Esquire or GQ or other magazines for men. The stories are great, and there is no question about it, they want me to buy their clothes. And that's fine. So this is a level of transparency that I really appreciate. So it is possible. But then when news brands, when they collaborate with advertisers like the Atlantic Monthly did, and when they involve their own staff, if they get people from the newsroom also to read for advertisers, this is now standard practice at Condé Nast, the publisher of Vogue, then you get a complete mix-up of interests. In the Netherlands, there was a scandal around this at Het Financiële Dagblad, our equivalent of the Financial Times, when they published a supplement on blue paper. Normally, Het Financiële Dagblad is published on pink paper, but this was blue because blue is the color of the brand identity of insurance company Aegon. And they had a supplement that was completely devoted to the future of our pensions, and every article in it was written by the regular staff, the newsroom staff of Het Financiële Dagblad. When this caused a stir, because Aegon was claiming that there was 100% independent journalism, Het Financiële Dagblad refused to comment for half a year. It was only after an article was published, a very critical article in the Volkskrant, that they put out a statement about this. So they embarrassed themselves and their news staff. Now the thing you may ask is, why is this a problem? Well, imagine you're working at Het Financiële Dagblad and your work is to cover insurance companies and pension funds. And on Monday you are asked to write a story for this supplement that is paid for by Aegon. And on Tuesday you are invited to write a story about woekerpolissen. And your name appears above both articles. What impression does this make on the intelligent readership of Het Financiële Dagblad, who pay, I don't know, maybe 400 euros a year to get independent journalism delivered to their doormats? It didn't make a good impression, and a great many people at the FD were embarrassed because of this. So don't involve your newsroom staff in branded content if you are a media title. But there is something of value to be found in involving good journalists, as long as they are freelancers or as long as they work for a separate department in your company. Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, Artsen Zonder Grenzen, made a fantastic media production that's about the reach of war. And they had a team of reporters, photographers, and journalists follow doctors in one day in all the countries around Syria doing their work for Artsen Zonder Grenzen. And this led to a 5,000 words massive long read, translated in 9 languages, with beautiful photo reportage attached to it. This is really worth your time too. So the funny thing is that when brands or organizations, if they take control of the story and they present it as something coming from their own brand, and they involve great journalists and reporters in it, you can have something that's worth your while. If news media step into this field, they don't really put their heart and soul into it. And that's why you don't see too many advertorials that people really love. Now, we are dealing with an overload of branded content at the moment. A few years ago, the idea that every brand could be a publisher became really, really popular, and this has led to every organization putting up its own blog or its own platform. All kinds of digital agencies have made money building these platforms, but then these organizations were left with the question, how on earth are we going to fill this platform from now on? And then they will find someone, an intern or a copywriter who's in the end of his career to write regular blog posts and make sure that it's spread on social media. So a great many of these platforms, even when they are about a company that has actually merit or interesting stories, they are dead in the water. They just sit there waiting to be discovered. But you can see when you visit these places that there's not a lot of love put into it. So building a platform is not enough. To be seen, to get your story out there in the world, you will also need media power. You need to reach places that already have an audience. Because for brands, if you compare brands to media organizations, every media title needs a lot of time and effort to build up a bond with an audience and to make this audience grow. And this is what all their efforts lead to. Brands are not used to this. It's a process that takes a lot of patience. But there's a technique that you can use to make sure that your stories are spread, but it does cost money. And this is part of rebuilding this barrier between advertising and journalism that had crumbled down over the last period of time. Brands can hire advertising space at news media like they always did. But instead of advertising the product they have, they can advertise the story that they put on their own platform. Particularly in digital media, you can make sure that if you put these like little trailers or little teasers of these stories there, you can direct people to your own platform, to the storytelling place that you as a brand own. So you can do this with the persgroep or with NRCQ. There's several places that will offer advertising space for you to hire, and you can fill it in a different way than you used to. This was a project I was involved in, a campaign for Triodos Bank made by advertising agency Doorn. Doorn is an Amsterdam-based agency that I collaborate with. And they made a series of mini documentaries. And to get people there, they published this on the digital, on the Volkskrant website. So it's completely clear that this is a story by Triodos Bank. So the branding, there's no mistaking about the branding. And it's meant to trigger you to watch the whole documentary. So here, I don't see any kind of ethical problem. This is not posing as independent journalism. This is a branded story that had a lot of effort put into it that's advertised on the Volkskrant. And you can do this with several media at the same time, so you don't have to have a deal just with one medium. You can spread your story in different titles if you wish. So this is what we like to call amplification. Now the fifth clash, and this also has to do with the way that news media treat these new advertising collaborations. It's the confusing labels they stick on it. The Guardian has a massive branded content department, and for instance, they do a lot of work for Unilever. So you can search something on the internet, something about sustainability, and then you will find a link, and you will end up here, for instance, on the Guardian Sustainable Business Partner Zone, supported by Unilever. What is this place? Who is in charge of the contents of these stories? Who decides? Who pays? Well, clearly Unilever is involved, but it says supported by. What does that mean? How much freedom do these journalists that write these stories have to make these stories? Would these stories be here if Unilever wasn't involved? You can't find out any of that if you look at this confusing title, the Sustainable Business Partner Zone. So what I would like to propose to make sure that ethically this doesn't pose so much of a problem anymore is to make sure that every story that is paid for by an advertiser has a sign that makes that clear. You have to know which brand is behind it. And if you don't know this, and there is a brand involved, it's misleading to us. And we're a pretty critical bunch. And we might never come back to the same place, or we might not like this brand as much as we did before. So in the end, trying to hide, trying to deceive, will not benefit your brand either, and it is detrimental to the reputation of several news media that have started to collaborate in this eager way. So proud and confident branding is something that you need if you are proud of your story, if you're proud of your perspective as a brand, and if you're proud of the people you involved in making the story. Acne Paper, this is a magazine published by a Swedish fashion house. It costs 10 euros, so this is branded content that people actually pay for. It's quite clever, I think. And it looks great on your coffee table. And it has no ads in it. It doesn't even show their own clothes. It's about history, it's about art, there's beautiful photography in it. So it can be done, but you have to make something original that's worth people's time, and you have to show them that it's yours, that it's your brand putting this out in the world. So over the last few years, I had a lot of talks like this. I've seen a lot of new initiatives. Every single quality newspaper has started a branded content department. And now I believe it's time to rebuild this wall between independent journalism and advertising again. But we do want some of the benefits for advertisers and brands of publishing stories. So that's why I started a company called Here. And this is the model that we would like to use. And it's based on the success stories that I've been witnessing over the last years. So the essential thing is that everything that you publish has to come from your brand's point of view, but there has to be a clear link with the needs and obsessions of your most important audience, the people you care about most as a brand. So that's the strategy part. What are you going to talk about, and who are you? And who is most important to you? That's the thing you should figure out first, because a great many brands just like to make entertainment for everybody. We would rather focus on the critical audience, because if we have them, the rest will follow. The second part is the creation of stories. What we'd like to do is make things that aren't only worth somebody's time, but also take some time to consume. So it will never be an interruption. It is something that people have to choose to spend time with. To make these stories, you will need to involve extraordinary storytelling talent. Photographers, documentary filmmakers, freelance journalists, illustrators, and so forth. And we can find them in a network of creatives just like yourselves. And then there is the delivery. So remember my point about amplification. This is one of the key things that we can now introduce. If we have great stories that brands will put their name on, we can distribute them through existing news media. They don't have to be involved in the creation of these stories, but they will allow their space to be hired to reach their audience. And of course, all these brands have their own platform, or they can publish on anything from LinkedIn to Facebook to Atavist to Medium.com, for instance. So as a brand, you have to figure out what your primary publishing platform is, and here you will make a collection of stories that you will publish over time. But to make sure that people see it, you can advertise them. So that is the essence of what we are introducing. So I'm really looking forward to all of your questions.